The Human Capital Institute is founded 4 years ago. It's a think tank and an information clearinghouse. And for 4 years they've been growing, we've been growing a pretty large library with over 200 volumes now dedicated to strategic talent management and human capital. A very robust research capability to do things like I talked about with the Partnership for Public Service, their study on federal employees, what's really going to happen with this boom of people becoming eligible to retire, and a growing certification capability to qualify people as human capital experts or human capital strategists in a way that allows them to be designated and found in the labor pool. So if you're at Social Security Administration and you need some folks to help you think about your talent management structure, you may want to hire some human capital strategists. And the Human Capital Institute has now been certified by Department of Labor to provide those people in an official way, very much like a black belt in Lean Six Sigma or a project management professional in the project management world. So HCI got started with this idea that people really matter within organizations, and have been collecting lots of research to provide this information clearinghouse function, doing research as part of our think tank function, and now doing more and more education and research to help organizations understand how to tap that power of getting the most that you can from your people. It's pretty dramatic. The Partnership for Public Service and the Human Capital Institute just finished a year-long survey of federal civil servants. The conclusion of that is that there's 500,000 civil servants that are going to be going home in the next 5 years. The reason this research is important is there's been a long time known fact that there were people eligible to retire, but it was not clear how many of them were actually going to. It turns out that the trends are very, very consistent over the last 30 years, that when people hit specific ages, they decide to leave. Well, 500,000 of the 1.5 million employees leaving over the next 5 years creates this pretty big vacuum of knowledge, of skills, of experiences in the workforce that have to be replaced with other knowledge, skills, and experiences to still get the mission done. The old model of retiring and not working is a model that's just not very consistent with the experiences that we're seeing anymore. And so you get a lot of people who stop working officially with their normal full-time benefit, traditional kind of workforce model that we have, and they become a big part of the non-traditional workforce. They're working part-time, they're job sharing, they're coming back to government jobs as contractors, they're doing a variety of things, but what they're not doing is staying home. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but what we're finding is almost the same patterns of retirement once you're retirement eligible, but very different patterns of behavior after you retire. People are just simply too young, too healthy. They have too many kind of needs that are financial needs, and they want to keep working. They find value in what they've done. Employers are also finding great value in this. You're seeing a number of people who are leaving long-term corporate jobs, who are go back taking philanthropic jobs. They're taking jobs whose primary characteristic is they're giving back either to the corporation or to the government. And that is probably the fastest growing segment that we're seeing in the non-traditional first retired workforce. For the last 32 years, the largest unemployment rate for people with a college degree is 2.6%. That's very consistent with this notion that if you want to work and you've been through college and you graduated, you can work. There's this huge war for talent going on in the United States between the public and the private sector. And what's happening more and more is that people who are either retired or for some reason don't want to be in the traditional workforce, there's still this great demand for their time and their talents to be applied to the functions that are required. They require people. And in the past, I think there's always been two pretty straightforward models. You could join a company that puts you up as part of their labor pool and bids your work out, and largely you give up some control on where you're going to work, and you've predefined some kind of arrangement on how many hours you want to work. And the second option that's been around historically is to be this independent consultant. And an independent consultant model is a fine model, but there's tremendous costs, and many of them hidden costs, about finding work, about maintaining your own insurance and your own liability, convincing firms of your own experiences being consistent with their needs, sometimes collecting money. You know, you go to work for people and they promise to pay, but they don't always come through. And so there's some risks involved in that second model, that independent consultant model, that you can, in the past, buy your way out of by being part of a corporate group that comes into it. There's also an opportunity, I think, though, in the middle for people who see the risks of being an independent, purely independent consultant and don't maybe like this instability that comes with that. But they also don't want to give up the total control of where they work and what they do by going to work at a large placement company. And I think that MBO Partners offers that middle ground for people who still want some stability, who still want some work, but don't want to live in that world of risk and liability. We've talked a little bit about the incentives from the individual's perspective, which is in the past there's kind of been two options for them. The independent consultant option and the risks and the instability with that, and the go with a large corporation where you have less control and maybe other characteristics that say, hey, I've been in the government a long time, I don't want to go to work for another large collective group of people that sells my talent. This middle path, represented by joining and working with MBO Partners, is a new path. It's different, and all the pressures from the market and from the individual suggest that it's going to be a very productive pursuit. The government perspective on this, though, I think is important as well, which is the government needs lots and lots of services. Government in the last 6 years has grown 50%, just the federal government alone. And so that's some pretty substantial growth. They're meeting that with military, civilian, and contract employees. The size of the military has actually shrunk over the last 6 years in terms of the total number of soldiers and sailors and Marines. The civil service workforce is virtually the same, but the contracted or this contingent workforce has grown quite a bit. There are some pressures from the government, though, about contracting. It's very expensive to contract from their perspective. Contracting officers are one job series that are in very short supply. So getting somebody in the government, training them to be good contracting or procurement officials and buying talents of people, generally what happens is train them, they promote, and then they leave. They go to work for the industry side instead of the government. So there's this structural constraint on having enough contract officers to do all the work. There's also the fact that every time you contract, it takes a fixed amount of work. So whether you buy one person or 10 people or 10,000 people to build a nuclear aircraft carrier, it takes a lot of work to do it. And so there's these constraints for both shortage of qualified people to do the procurements. There's this fixed cost of actually going out and retaining talent, which suggests that the government is going to continue to be perceived as someone who does whatever's easy. That's a nice kind of buzzword to describe it. In reality, there's these structural problems that prevent them from every time they need some help going out and hiring one or two people independently. The idea that they can go to a GSA schedule, that they can pick talent off the top, that they can procure people with one contract in a variable amount of ways. So they think they need 40 people, but it grows to 80, and they can just stay within the contract to do that, where there's a given rate structure and given definitions of job codes, is a pretty powerful idea from the government's perspective, not just from the individuals. I think that the tax risk and the tax gap that exists with people who are independent consultants and don't fully disclose their income and expenses in a way that would allow the federal government to realize the tax revenue that they're due is a great national issue. It doesn't influence any one federal government's decisions about are they going to do it this way or do it that way. I think it's a legitimate national issue. I think there's serious discussions about it on the Hill. And the idea that's been discussed of capturing taxes from full taxes from people, even though they're independent consultants, is a powerful idea in terms of closing that gap.